Here we go.
Recording in progress.
I'm getting
All
it.
right, we are recording. And I think this is could be the 10th session already, something like that. Let's begin tonight on page 22. Going to go back one paragraph, and then we'll start the last section of the introduction. So we are just about out of the introduction after 10 sessions. Aren't you proud? This is good. This is good. All right, so before we dive into the text, once again, any thoughts, any comments, any questions, anything that you've been chewing on for the last week? Any leftovers from last week? We've got Jerry Jones twice now. That's a little frightening.
It wasn't
Very
me.
squared.
I'm definitely having trouble.
That's what the echo is.
That's the echo.
Yeah,
right?
there's also an echo there, Jerry. That's crazy.
Oh, no.
The feedback loop from one machine to the other. The microphones are feeding back into each other.
Sorry.
Yeah, what could you possibly have open? Oh, well.
Your phone and your computer.
Are you on your phone and your computer, Jerry?
You got to mute on.
Okay, I
No,
guess so.
I'm not.
All right.
I don't know how to get out.
I think you gotta mute one and turn the volume down in the other.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it seems that you've logged in twice, so at least mute one of them. Okay, and all of this is being recorded, so isn't that lovely? If you are watching this, never mind. We're going to get into it now. What I want to do is back up one paragraph because we ended right at awareness and interpretation, the last section of the introduction. I want to just go back one just so we can get a running start at this and pick up some stuff that we didn't have time to really develop maybe as fully as we could have last week. And just to catch us up, everything in the introduction is trying to just set the groundwork for the contemplative life. And his main premise is that if you aren't at a place in your life where individual moments can stun you, awe you, take your breath away, if you can't see the sacred in the ordinary, in your everyday moments, then you're not at a place where contemplative practice is going to take hold, where the contemplative life is going to take hold. We have to be able to just be present enough, to be uncluttered enough, undistracted enough, to let the moment really take hold of us. And so that's kind of where he's going with this. So that whole idea of awe and surrender and dispassion and everything that he's been talking about is getting at letting go of all the distractions, moving past the distractions, both intellectual and emotional. And in this last section that we just finished last week, he was talking about both positive and negative passions. That normally when we think of passions, which he defined as an excess of emotion, which is, of course, very distracting, very triggering, he says we usually think of the negative ones. But he said the positive ones can be just as distracting, just as off-putting to the contemplative life as the negative ones, and they're sneakier because we don't think of them as being a problem. And we think of them either as being a virtue, we think of them being as something good in our lives, and so we are slower to see how they are also taking us off the beam. So starting on page 22, right in the middle of the page, he says, we are all temporarily inflated inside of any wonderful anything, and we become impatient and even harsh when anything gets in our path. Think of people on overstimulating vacations, or the bored, irritated looks of people in line for food, entertainment, or an airplane flight. The search for full fun is its own form of dualistic entrapment. Such pleasure cruises can even be more dangerous than funks precisely because we are not prepared to spot them as problematic. They are not, of course, bad or sinful in and of themselves, just dangerous in the way they create the need for more of a good thing, which is how we get subtly fooled and set out on a wrong track. I guess that's why fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience were called the four cardinal virtues. Cardo, the root of cardinal, means hinge in Latin. And even faith, hope, and love are not effective or healing unless they are hinged onto fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience. Again, the ancients were wiser than modern psychology might have assumed. Okay, I thought this was an interesting and good paragraph. He makes some good points here. So whenever we are experiencing something that we consider good, something that is fulfilling or joyful, whatever it happens to be, that's not a moment of growth for us. That's a moment of consolidation. All we want to do is we want to just bring it all in. We want to hang on to it. We want to clone it. And we just want it to last for the rest of our lives, right? The times that we actually grow are the difficult times, which is why he says there is necessary suffering. Actually, not in this book, but in Falling Upward, he talked about necessary suffering. And that the great paths to the spiritual truth, enlightenment journey are great sorrow and great love. So when we are in a place, what he calls a pleasure cruise, or an overstimulating anything, that's a time when we can not only be distracted from contemplation and the presence of the moment, we also become kind of junkies with the drug. We're going to want more and more of the same thing. We're going to want to start looking for the spectacular rather than being able to see the sacred in just the ordinary and the everyday. And he says that is the danger in the positive passions, the positive excesses of emotion. And that's why dispassion was such a high virtue of the early Christians who were of this more contemplative mindset than we certainly are today. And then he gets into the cardinal virtues. I guess that's why fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience were called the four cardinal virtues. Now, there's a couple of those words we don't use very often anymore, but just to refresh, fortitude, of course, means courage, but it also can mean endurance and it can mean resilience. So it's not just courage and what we think of bravery, but it's also the willingness to keep showing up over and over and over again. This is why James makes such a big deal about endurance, which is the thing that perfects us in our faith. To persevere, to keep showing up, that is also a form of fortitude or courage. Temperance, a word that we usually don't use anymore, really means discipline or self-restraint or moderation. Moderation. There's a word for our times, huh? How much moderation do you see around you anymore as we enter another election year? It's not a lot of moderation going on out there, not a lot of temperance, but self-restraint, discipline, and moderation attached to endurance, resilience, courage, and then prudence, another word we don't use, but that would be thoughtfulness, wisdom, or caution. So this is a part of us that's kind of circumspect. This is the part of us that looks at all sides of an issue before jumping in without any thought. So this is what prudence is all about. And then finally, patience, which is really about the acceptance of delay. When something that we want is not coming on the time scale that we would want it to come, to accept that delay and to tolerate the suffering that comes from that delay, the pain. It also has to do with empathy and with a certain amount of flexibility to be able to deal with the delays that are unforeseen and still be able to move through. So that's a pretty good list if you think about it, right? From courage, endurance, resilience, to discipline, self-restraint, moderation, to thoughtfulness, wisdom, and caution, and then to an acceptance of delay and a tolerance of suffering mixed with empathy and flexibility. And he says that's why he believes that even faith, hope, and love, and faith that we have talked about in here is action, has to do with what's happening right now, acting as if something is true even when there's no evidence for it. Hope, which is trust that develops after we have acted in faith and something has proven itself trustworthy. That has to do with not yet, right? So we got now, we got not yet, and then we have love, which we have often identified in here as identification with the beloved. It's not a form of behavior or feeling, but actual connection, identification, feeling one with, and then all those other behaviors and emotions flow from that connection. And that has to deal with always. So faith, hope, and love are not effective or healing unless they are hinged onto the fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience. And I hope you can see how that can be true. How is it that we do experience and engage and act in faith, hope, and love if we're not also engaging in fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience? And again, he says the ancients were wiser than modern psychology might have assumed. Any thoughts, comments on any of that? Questions? How's it striking you? This is important stuff because it's laying the groundwork for contemplative practice. In contemplation, I'll tell you what, if you don't have endurance, if you don't have resilience, it's going to be really difficult for you, especially in the early stages of trying to set your program for yourself, your ritual, your habit. If you don't have discipline, self-restraint, if you don't have a form of moderation, if there isn't something in you that is reflective, thoughtful, and if you're not willing to accept delay and suffering as it goes through, all of these are going to be of primary importance, tools that you will need in order to really engage and maintain contemplative practice in your life.
I think it's a high bar it's a high standard, high bar to meet.
Yeah.
To get there.
But the good news is you don't have to do it all at once. Bit by bit, step by step, you know? I had a friend who lived with us for a year and a half, and he was a recovering alcoholic. And Marion and I cleared out all the alcohol, all the booze out of our house before he arrived. And we missed one little third bottle of Kahlua that was up in the top of our little walk-in pantry. And we didn't even know it was up there. And it was a year after he left us that he said, he told me about that bottle of Kahlua up in the pantry. And I said, you know, why didn't you tell me? We would have poured it out. We tried to get rid of everything. We just missed that one. He says, no, you don't understand. He said, every morning I would wake up, I'd walk to the kitchen, open the pantry door and look up and see if the Kahlua bottle was still there. And then I would say, not today. And then he would close the pantry door and go on about his day. It was a daily reminder that this day was not going to be that day that he would drink again. And I think, you know, Ellen, when you talk about the high bar that we're facing here, it's just right now, today, you know, today, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delay my gratification. You know, today, I'm going to show up one more time for this centering prayer session. And you just do it day by day. And then if you keep showing up, after a while, before you know it, you've got a lot of time under your belt and you're starting to feel the changes in yourself. Don't try to approach this all at once with everything that's here in this book or anything that I tell you or anybody tells you, because that's overwhelming. It's just, what's the next step? Can you take that next step? And if you have a bad day and you can't take it, all right, guess what? There's another day coming around the corner. And then you start again. So take the pressure off yourselves, you know, take the urgency off of it, but try to keep showing up to whatever you purpose to do.
You know, Dave, the image I have of this whole with the hyper vacations and all that, I'm kind of seeing this scenario of parents that take their kids and they have this great vacation and they're on this high. And then they say, okay, this is the end of our vacation now. We have to pack our bags and go home. We have to get on the plane. It's time for you guys to go back to school, do your homework next week. You know, in the first year, the kids might scream and cry, no, we don't want to go. But after a while, they start to maybe see patience, and as they mature, they'll say, wow, that was a really cool vacation. I'm going to look forward to the next one. And I know there has to come an end to that. And I have to go back to school and do my homework. And it's not going to always be this high. So maybe over time, those kids will mature into some of that. And they start to see that, if they wait and do good things and use their courage and wisdom, they'll get there. But it's not going to happen every day all the time.
That's a great illustration. I love that. Okay,
Dave-
so yeah, go ahead, William.
Said faith is now, hope is not yet, and love is always.
Yeah, I was trying to attach some, some monikers to them, because I see faith as biblical faith is action. So action is always now. And the main thing to understand, faith is not just what we think. Faith is not mental assent, not mental agreement, not just agreeing to believe in something and say that it's true. That's just an idea. Belief is an idea. Faith is action. Hope is trust. Trust is always not yet, because we're hoping in something to come. And so here's this balance between now and not yet. But faith is a vehicle in order to get to hope. And then when the hope has proven itself trustworthy, then we get love. We actually become identified with the other, with the beloved. And that's to me is an always. So, I mean, these were just my notes. You don't need to take them to the bank or anything, but if they help you, great. If not, you know what to do.
Nice. That is so poetic. You could write a poem. You could write a poem with that.
Mhm.
Do it, Ellen. And then read it to us.
Oh,
Okay, so the summary of this last section, which was called Passions and Practice, then, is that the passions, the excess of emotions, both positive and negative, must be moderated. That we have to moderate them. We have to use our temperance with these passions, or they will blind us to deeper presence. So that is kind of what he's getting across, the main takeaway or thought for me in this section, that the passions, the excess of emotion, negative we understand, the positive is the sneaky one. So it's even the positive emotions, those still need to be moderated. And if you remember, what we talked about with the consolations and the desolations, that the early church looked at consolations as part of the immaturity of a new believer. But that as a person matured and moved into deeper places of their faith, those consolations would dissolve and they would move into the desolations, or a place of more kind of equanimity, but they wouldn't be experiencing necessarily these highs and these ecstasies. Fast forward to us, we look at the highs and the ecstasies as proof of our spiritual maturity, rather than our immaturity as the early church looked at it, which is fascinating to me, the way the whole culture has flipped. But we do need to moderate
Dave,
passions. Yeah.
sorry. It reminds me of when I was practicing, one of my specialties was depression, and a lot of people report depression if they work a regular work week on Sunday. And it makes me wonder if it had to do, partially, usually it had to do with going back to work. And it's a small example of what I think he's talking about here, which is the weekend represented freedom, play, being able to do kind of whatever you wanted before heading back into work. And so the depression always happened like Sunday afternoon, evening. They probably could have used this book. But it makes me wonder if this wasn't a little bit of what was going on in a small way, you know, not a big going to Disneyland way, but it's just always fascinated me why it would happen just on Sundays.
That's so interesting you bring that up because I just talked about this a couple of Sundays ago that in my 20s, I had exactly that. I had severe depression that would always hit Sunday afternoons. And for years I was experiencing this, but I didn't have any place to put it. I just knew it would happen. And then in my 30s, when I started going back to church again, it went away. And what I realized for me was that as a child, Sundays were always about church. Every morning we were very practicing Catholics back then, and my parents were. And so we got all dressed up, in the 60s, you dressed up and in your best, and we went to church, went to mass, and then afterwards we went to Paris restaurant, same restaurant every time. I can still see that restaurant when I close my eyes, and pancakes and it was such a comforting routine as a kid. It was just as night followed day, there was mass and Paris restaurant on Sunday mornings and afternoon. And then my parents stopped going to church when I was, I think, a junior. No, I was a freshman or sophomore in high school, and they stopped going to church, and we all stopped going to church. And I didn't start going to church again until my early 30s. And I think it was the loss of that routine. There was something that was comforting. And then I was out of the house, I was on my own, and I was unmoored. And I think that's what was hitting me on Sunday afternoons because it went away when I put my own ritual back in place. But that's so fascinating that I didn't know that that was a thing.
Very common.
That's really interesting. All right, we have digressed again. So you get this stuff for free. Let's dive into this last section, awareness and interpretation, on page 23. He says, so we are the interpreter of what we see, fear, desire, lust over, or react to. And it is finally our interpretation of any event or encounter that prevails. If we do not have a somewhat natural recourse to a larger framing, which is what healthy religion is supposed to give us, we will spend much of our life in very small boxing rings, fighting largely useless battles, all based on our unproven and usually self-referential assumptions about what is happening. All this, in great part, depends on which inner reservoir is ready and waiting, which inner reservoir is empty and begging to be filled, and with what precisely our reservoir is filled. This takes genuine and daily vigilance. It is the heart of all spirituality. Authentic spirituality is always seeking daily bread to feed the starving parts of our soul, and fresh and living water to fill our reservoir instead of allowing the dark waters to develop toxins and poisonous algae, which largely happens at a slow, certain, and unconscious level. Thus, both Jesus and Buddha say the same thing. Stay awake. Watch the lens through which we are reading the moment. We all have preferred and practiced styles of attention. We must discover ours, or we will not see things as they are, but rather see things as we are. It is a lifelong task of mirror wiping. I am always my first problem. And if I deal with me, then I can deal with other problems much more effectively. The real gift is to be happy and content, even while we are just sitting on the front porch, looking at a rock, or when we're doing the nothingness of prayer, or benevolently gazing at anything in its ordinariness, or when we can see and accept and say that every single act of creation is just this, and thus allow it to work its wonder on us. This is the ultimate and real recovery moment. Authentic recovery is not actually about mere sobriety, as much as it is about simple and ever deeper connection with what is. Deep connection is our goal, and it frees us from all loneliness, separateness, and boredom, and is far beyond just stopping the addictive behavior. That's just cleaning up, or maybe even growing up, but we are about waking up. So learn, go enjoy, and rest in inner contentment and positivity. a full reservoir of fresh water, both before the success and after the failure. And then you have the treasure that no one can take from you or give to you. You will be ready for many moments of awe, and you will be capable of the surrender that brings both foundational union and joy. Remember, the whole process most often begins by one long relished moment of awe, one fully sincere moment of seeing and saying just this. And as Isaiah promised, you will know that every moment is shouting, I am here, I am here. Okay. Any thoughts or comments on that we just read through before we go back and pick it apart?
I want to do it again.
We will, right now, bit by bit.
Hmm.
I got lost. I got lost somewhere in that first part. It was like so deep. I was like, I'm so glad knowing you were going back to pick it apart. So,
Yeah, we just do the flyby, and then we're going to come back and we're going to go like urban warfare, right? House by house, block by block. We're going to do that next.
A lot of that reminds me of the serenity prayer. The God grant me the wisdom to be able to, know the difference between, or be able to, the courage to change the things we can, and the serenity to accept the things we can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I mean, what we do have control over is the way we view our reality, through the lenses that we have. And I still often have difficulties. I think one of the easiest ways for me to do that is to try to detach or not identify with my thoughts. Know that they're there, but not to necessarily put attach like absolute truth to that. And then definitely with prayer, just pray to God for opening my eyes and to be able to see what it is that he wants me to see, not through my dirty lenses.
That's great, Sarah. That's right on it. Especially like when you said that you try not to attach absolute truth to the thoughts that are running through your head. That's so important, because when we're inside that bubble, everything seems justified. Everything has its own internal logic and makes total sense, except to anybody outside your bubble, and they're wondering what you're smoking. But
yeah,
that's the thing. If we can train ourselves not to just accept as absolute truth the emotions, the thoughts, wow, that's huge.
How does it the two other things that we were talking about tonight, how do they put together as a three teams actually? Probably different.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're getting at exactly, Linda, but I'll tell you what, as we go back through this, see if your question gets answered. Okay? And then if not, you can ask it again and we'll see if we can get closer into it.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go back. Page 23, awareness and interpretation. So we are the interpreter of what we see, fear, desire, lust over, and react to. And it is finally our interpretation of any event or encounter that prevails. Man, if we don't get that, we are so cooked. We need to understand that we are not experiencing reality directly, but we're experiencing it through the filter of what we think we know and believe, and what we've been taught, and especially all that unconscious information and material that's really driving the bus. All of that is creating an interpretation. It's what gets through the filter that we actually experience and tend to believe. It's an interpretation. It's not reality. It's kind of what Sarah was just saying, that she wants to make sure that these thoughts running through her head, she's just not blindly accepting as absolute truth. We need to understand this is an interpretation. That's why eyewitnesses are so bad at a crime scene, right?
Mm.
You know, you have multiple people, they all see the same thing and they all see something different, you know, because it's an interpretation of what's going on. And this was one of the main breakthroughs that I had as I was starting the study of Christianity and whether I could continue to be a Christian at all when I was in early pastoral training. The breakthrough was that the interpretation of Scripture was just that. It was an interpretation. It was an opinion, even though it may be an educated opinion, and there could be opinions that persist over time and many people believe in them. That gives them more credibility, but it's still just an opinion, which meant that I could also have mine and that it was up to me to find mine. I didn't need to just accept this absolute truth monolithically from another source. So in terms of Scripture and biblical interpretation, that was huge, but then extrapolate that, put that out there and realize all of our experience is an interpretation. How does that change things in terms of the way we look at life? And then his next point is, if we don't have a somewhat natural recourse to a larger framing or framework, right, which is what healthy religion is supposed to give us, we will spend much of our life in very small boxing rings, fighting largely useless battles, all based on our unproven and usually self-referential assumption about what is happening. That's also a huge statement, isn't it? And this is where religion has so fallen down on us. It doesn't give us that larger framework. It doesn't give us that larger reference. In fact, if anything, it has narrowed it down to just that personal salvation plan, which is all revolving around the self and doesn't include the larger picture and distorts the way that we interpret each event, experience that we go through. This is important stuff to think about, and think about how it's affecting you. What is your reference point? How do you interpret all the facts and experiences that you go through?
Dave, I'm finding myself thinking that the more, I don't know, sure we are of our religious footing, whatever that is, then the more we're narrowed in, basically. But that seems like a bad thing, right? But aren't we supposed to be more and more sure? Like,
who told you that, Billy?
Now this,
It ain't happening to me.
So William, you're really onto something here, and this is a huge point. And I've taken some pains to try to make this distinction and see if it comes through this time or if it even makes any sense. Is that there's a difference between certainty and conviction, and maybe I'm just doing semantics here, but I'm trying to make a point between the two because they are very different. There is no certainty in life, and there is certainly no certainty in existential matters, in spiritual matters, in religious matters. In this world that we're approaching spiritually, a world that we can't see, we can't measure with any of our instruments, right? Because it stands by definition outside of space and time. How are we going to be certain of anything? And this is where religion has really fallen down again, besides narrowing the focus to personal salvation in terms of Western Christianity, but also to pretend that it can give us certain answers, either about the Bible and what the Bible says, or about doctrinally, about what absolutely must take place in order for us to be approved by God. I mean, just go down the list of things that church tells you that they are certain of, and that we must certainly agree to mentally, or we're not going to be approved. That is not the role of religion. Instead of opening us or trying to nail down certainty, religion should be opening us up to mystery. opening us up to the paradoxical and allowing us to have the tools, the endurance, and the wherewithal. Maybe it's, again, fortitude, temperance, prudence, and patience to be able to live with the paradox and the uncertainty. But here's what happens as we do that. As we delve more and more into that uncertainty and that paradox, we experience more and more of the trustworthiness of that unseen world. And what happens there is that we start to become convinced of things. And the conviction runs really deep. It can go all the way to our toes, all the way to the bone. It's as good as certainty, except that we can't prove it to anybody else. And nobody can prove it to us. See, we want to take it by just bestowal. We want it to be bestowed to us. We want to read it out of a book and just know that it's true and have that certainty, but it doesn't work that way. Conviction is experiential and must be suffered through to get to. But once we've got it, now that assurance you're talking about, William, is there. But it's not the same as certainty because it's not empirical and you can't prove it to anybody else except to yourself. Does that help make sense or muddy the waters?
A little of both, and I like that.
Oh, here we go. Uncertainty.
So conviction, not certainty.
And that's just my attempt at a distinction. So, don't get married to the words, but hopefully the concept, at least, that there is a difference between the two.
Dave, is the conviction also something you as an individual, it's a conviction because you'll act on it.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that's different than a belief or a certainty about a belief, especially if it's one that's been taught to you by the group or somewhere else. I mean, why am I not a Muslim? Well, I wasn't born in North Africa. I was born in America, right? So, I mean, everybody in their religion, if you're born in India, you're a Hindu, not all Indians, but you know what I mean? So, but the conviction becomes the thing that you live by. It becomes so real to you that you don't need to prove it to anyone else. You just live by it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes and no. I mean, people obviously act on beliefs too, and even inherited beliefs. In stage 2 spirituality, we give ourselves over to the groupthink. We give ourselves over to what the group believes, and we throw ourselves into that. And that, whether it's a national group or whether it's a religious group, we act on those convictions. And we're very certain about them too. We believe with absolute certainty that we're right and everybody else is wrong. What's going to happen as you live longer, though, is that life is going to mug you. And then that certainty is going to evaporate because suddenly it cannot accommodate the loss that you have now experienced. And what's going to take its place? And that's moving through those losses, moving through those traumas in life, are what strip away the certainty and then get us to a realistic place. Because even in conviction, you recognize that that's not the same as certainty. I mean, I'm convinced that death is not the end of human experience, that something else is going to continue after I die. But am I really certain about it? No. No, I can't tell you that I'm absolutely certain that's going to happen. I'm convinced of it because of the experiences I've had of love in life. But it's not the same as certainty, which means there is some room for mystery and a not knowing. And that's where the scariness comes in, of course. But so there is a difference. But yes, you can act on the certainty of your beliefs for as long as they last. And you can also act on your convictions. But that's the faith part of it. If there's no doubt, there is no faith. Faith is the ability to act in the presence of doubt, just as courage is the ability to act in the presence of fear. No fear, no courage, no doubt, no faith. So to admit that we still have uncertainty and there are unknowns, and to act anyway on our convictions, that's about as good as it gets.
That's exactly what I've been doing, Dave. I came in to the effect and with you and have had a conviction throughout my life that there is something past our existence here on earth, and it is what some people call heaven, a relationship with God, and then the thought has been those thoughts have been creeping into my head recently about what happens when our life as we know it here ceases to exist. Bob Lang, for example, I've been ruminating on where he is, and the day after the memorial, or it was the Sunday after he passed. Anyway, you said from front of church, you were telling everybody, you were saying, where is he? And you asked that question, and it took me back to something that I'd heard you say some time ago, that I can only share about that which I am convinced. And wow, I mean, that's a that's a real catch-22. Now, I'm not saying I don't believe. I absolutely do believe, and very strongly. But there's that thought that's creeping in that what if it is just what if we just become mud? Our bodies become mud, or dust, as it were. And there's that ethereal spirit that we have that we think exists and continues on. And I think that's probably been something that's been discussed over the ages, through the ages, and something that something in which I strongly believe still. And I saw something the other day about a woman who had a near-death experience, or a death experience, was supposedly dead for 27 minutes or something like that, and that when she came back, I mean, she came out of this after there were no vital signs for almost a half hour, and she scribbled on a piece of paper, "It's real." And then they asked her what is real, and that that heaven is real, and that she was there, and she saw the face of Jesus, et cetera, and so on. And those are neat experiences to read about, and experiences that I can hold on to, hopefully. I'm in a bit of a quandary over it now. Again, all of that, maybe I'm speaking out of both sides now. That's okay, because that's what I do. Anyhow, it is an interesting thought pattern, however, to have a strong conviction of the fact that there is life, there is a life, quote unquote, past this life. But do we just go to dust? And it's maybe that's what you and the clergy deal with on a daily basis spiritually. But and it's something I think for everybody to consider. But that's something that's been pretty present in my mind of late.
Mm-hmm. I think if we're honest, we all feel the same way. The brilliant scene in the movie Jackie that I played a few times at church, or at least read the script through, where the priest who is counseling Jackie Kennedy right after the assassination of her husband, and she's despondent and she's suicidal and all the rest, and he tells her, I've led a blessed life, but every night when I crawl into bed and I turn out the light and I stare into the darkness, I ask myself, is this all there is? And she says, you do? He goes, every soul on earth does, and it's part of the human experience. It's easy for me to say, yes, I believe in life after death from the comfort of my armchair. But when I woke up in the middle of the night with the chest pain shooting down my left arm, I'll tell you what, it becomes a very different reality then. And it's like, yeah, some fears shot up that I just didn't even know that I had anymore, because it's like, wow, is this real? What happens now? And so it's something to be aware of, that we are living in uncertainty and mystery. And yet it's the mystery that makes life alive, makes it worth living. If we didn't have that mystery, there would be no reason to get up in the morning. And so it's really important that we remember that as we're living this spiritual walk that we talk about so much, is that it's not about gaining certainty. It's about entering the mystery. Or as Richard Rohr said, that mystery is not what we can't know, but it's endless knowability. It's not what we can't understand, but it's understanding endlessly, that there's always more to know, and we will never reach the end of that knowing, which is mystery. But it's not the same as not being able to understand or know at all. You know, choose your poison, right? Pick your poison here, because however you see it, however you interpret it, we're getting back to interpretation, is going to answer some questions and beg others. It's always going to be a mixed bag. But understand that it is your interpretation that you're dealing with, which the good news to that is that you can wipe the lens even cleaner and cleaner again and get a clearer and clearer interpretation. There's no end to that process, but you can keep cleaning the lens. And that's what we're trying to do with contemplation. We're trying to clean the lens so we can see our moments more and more clearly as they are, without the distortion of our interpretation.
And Dave, I can see why in some religions that maybe have a very narrow focus, like William was saying, it can be a lot easier to just go down that narrow path and say, this is what I'm told, this is what I'm taught, here's where I'm going to go. I can just breathe easy and I'll just go with that. It's the easier answer than dealing with the mystery. And I can see why some people would be more comfortable with that. And
Oh,
maybe others
absolutely.
not.
Absolutely. But that's only going to last for so long, because eventually that next loss is going to hit you and it's going to strip it all away. It will not be adequate at some point to deal with life as life presents. And so if we haven't learned that flexibility that we talked about in patience, right, then we're not going to be able to accommodate the losses that we sustain and remake the meaning in a way that gives us another paradigm, another way of looking at life that allows us to accept life on life's terms and live with hope and gratitude. So, and if we get stuck in that too narrow place, then what he's talking about is we'll spend much of our life in very small boxing rings, right? Fighting largely useless battles, all based on our unproven and usually self-referential assumptions about what is happening. We get stuck in the smallness of things. And I know we've all experienced it in ourselves and others, those who are totally caught up in some of the smallest details, you know, and continuing to spin around them as if they matter. And that's what happens when we don't have a large enough frame of reference. We haven't allowed that to expand through our existential, spiritual, contemplative practices. And then he makes this statement about all of this in great part depends on which inner reservoir is ready and waiting, which inner reservoir is empty and begging to be filled, and with what precisely our reservoir is filled. So he's talking about all that interior content, everything that's in us that we have gathered, that we're using as our frame of reference. And that's both conscious and unconscious. That's the sneaky part, is the unconscious stuff. What are those core beliefs down there? What are those programs for happiness, as Thomas Keating puts them? What's all that stuff, both intellectual and emotional, creating in us and creating that interpretation of reality? Sometimes against our better judgment, it's creating an interpretation that can be largely emotional and maybe working against even what we say we believe intellectually, and yet we're in that kind of dissonance. Finally, when we get to the contemplative reservoir, as we start to build that one, that's going to be largely a non-rational and dispassionate reservoir. So it's going to be working the other side of the street from intellect and emotion. It's going to be working for the dispassionate part and the non-rational part. because that's the part that allows us to really wipe the windshield as clean as possible, the lens as clean as possible, to remove as much of the predisposition of the interpretation that we can assign to whatever it is we're experiencing. Turning the page, he says, this takes genuine and daily vigilance. It's the heart of all spirituality. Well, it's also the heart of all psychology, isn't it? I mean, isn't this what psychology is all about? Back me up on this, Becky. I mean, isn't this what we're trying to do, is clean the lens, wipe the lens?
Yeah. And I mean, this feels real cognitive behavioral to me from a psychological standpoint.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how much contemplative spirituality lines up with modern psychology. I mean, that's what Thomas Keating was brilliant at. I mean, if you want to really read Invitation to Love by Thomas Keating, he really puts it all together there, how modern psychology connects with contemplative practice, and because they're really trying to do the same thing. And so this daily vigilance that he's talking about is the showing upness to mindful practice, or showing up to centering prayer meditation, using the tools that we have available to us to instill the 4 S's, right? Silence, solitude, stillness, and simplicity. We're trying to get those really established in our lives, because that's what's going to clear the lens. It's also going to thin out the barrier between the unconscious and the conscious, so that stuff can bubble up. You know, you'll start remembering things that you forgot, and you'll see how that is driving current thought and behavior patterns. It's amazing how it works. But it can work very well in concert with therapy or anything else that you may be doing at the same time. But that's the process, is trying to get clear of all of that stuff, get healed from it, to use that terminology. He says authentic spirituality is always seeking daily bread to feed the starving parts of our soul, and fresh and living water to fill our reservoir, instead of allowing the dark waters to develop toxins and poisonous algae, which largely happens at a slow, certain, and unconscious level. And so he's talking about constantly plugging back into the source in our moments. And I've often used the analogy of, how long is that lamp going to stay lit when you unplug it from the wall? We have to stay plugged in. We think that we can keep going, maybe like a branch that is cut off from a tree, or a flower that is picked, will stay looking like itself for a little while, but that's basically all we're doing. We're all cut flowers, basically. And if we don't plug back into the source, we know what happens, spiritually speaking. And so this is what contemplation is also doing. It's plugging back into the source, the presence of everything in our moments. Thus, both Jesus and Buddha say the same thing: stay awake. Watch the lens through which we are reading the moment. Understand that we even have a lens through which we are reading the moment in the first place, right? We have all preferred and practiced styles of attention. We must discover ours, or we will not see things as they are, but rather see things as we are. It's a lifelong task of mirror wiping. I am always my first problem, and if I deal with me, then I can deal with other problems much more effectively. So at this point in my margin notes, I was going to ask you all to react to a question here, but since we're coming to the end of the hour, let's save this for next week. But the question is, and maybe you can think about it, is how does God speak to you? We all have preferred and practiced styles of attention. We must discover ours, or we will not see things as they are, but as we are. To me, this equates to how does this divine presence, this presence with a capital P that we are trying to interface with, how does that presence speak to us? How have you learned to listen to that presence? This is really important for us to discover in ourselves, because every one of us is going to have a different experience. And even if we express them in the same way, use the same words, they can really have a very different feel if you were really able to get into each other's skin. And so it's something that need to think about, but not tonight. Because it's time.
Really
So
good.
we'll start with that next week, and we'll open that up for a little discussion, and then we'll finish this
Hey,
introduction, move into chapter 1 after
Dave?
that.
Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, Scott.
I just had a huge earthquake to roll through. I need to make sure everything's okay. So if you can take over for the closing.
Have not
prayer.
felt a thing.
I'm not asking you
Yeah.
if you felt anything. I'm telling you what happened. And I
Yeah,
need to
I
make
just
sure
felt-
everything's okay.
Yeah, I felt
We're
something.
loud.
It was the walls creaking. So
I
maybe
did
that was,
too.
and that
Feel
made,
felt it also.
Hmm.
No, I'm just saying, I didn't feel a thing here. So you felt it over there though, Scott?
He just
No.
left.
I guess it took him offline.
Yeah.
Did he say he
Wow.
felt it, or he just knew
He
about it
felt
on the
it.
news?
he
He
felt
felt
it.
it.
Okay.
But then at the same moment, I felt my wall as if it was creaking, that it shifted, but it was
me
just
too.
creaking.
Yeah.
I'm feeling
smaller aftershocks too.
Mm.
So you're feeling it, Patricia?
Yes, I felt it quite strong.
Where's
Wow, that's weird because I'm only,
Where are you at, Patricia?
San Juan Capistrano.
Oh,
yeah, I
Right.
mean, she's just, 8 miles
Feeling-
from us, and I didn't feel anything.
We're
Bill
so
and
focused
Gail,
on you. We're so focused on you, Dave. We didn't feel a thing.
It's God speaking to
obviously Scott
everybody.
isn't. Yeah. So Bill and
So-
Gail, you didn't feel anything where you are? And Kathy, you didn't either?
No.
That's interesting. Sharon,
I'm in
Sharon, did you feel it?
Escondido.
Did you feel something, Sarah?
No,
Yeah,
Oh, you
actually,
did?
I heard it. There are things on
Oh.
the wall that were shaking.
Oh my gosh.
And where are you, Sarah?
Escondido.
Okay, so yeah,
A
you're
little
out
bit inland.
Scott's way. So
Yeah,
it's
she's
gonna be
out
on the
there.
other side of the mountains over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Well, hopefully Scott is all right, and he ducked out just in time not to have to say the closing prayer. How nice of him. Do I have someone who would like to say a closing prayer tonight? Let's throw it out to the group.
I will say it.
Okay, Linda, go ahead.
I am so grateful that I'm here. And if I get into it, I will just cry. But I'm so glad that I'm where I am, and that I wish you, all of you guys, that you wish each other, all of you, and your faces are beautiful. And I just love it. And the things that kind of make, for me, I get I can't talk this way, I don't know. Things really give me things that I cannot change. And that's really sad, but guess what? About everything that I know has the same problem. The ducks and the bugs and all those things. I don't know about them, but I love being here. I absolutely love being here, and thank you, all of you.
In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
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 Thanks,
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Linda.
Linda. That was great,
Absolutely.
Linda.
All right.
thank you, Linda.
And
All right, everyone, another good week, another good night.
Bye, everybody.
Keep on.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
The echo of Jerry has spoken.
Jerry's next.
Hi, Jerry.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, Linda. Good night. Good night,
Good
guys.
night, everybody. Good night, Sarah. Thank you. Jim. Good night, buddy. And Linda. Good night, dear.
Have a good
I'll see you.
night.
I'll see you Saturday.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Bye-bye.